Welcome back. In this episode, I'll be continuing my musings on getting started with video production from my perspective as a total noob. I've been trying to figure out video for years, but I've never made any real progress. A lot of that was simply because I was caught up in theory instead of trying to actually do it. With these videos, I'm trying to kill two birds with one stone. First, they're practical experience for me. Secondly, hopefully they can help anyone else in a similar position get started too. In the last episode, I talked about some of the things that I considered important when doing anything with video. Number 2 on that list was improving your sound quality. When it comes to conveying your message, sound is a pretty big deal. If you can't be heard and understood, it's really hard to convey that message. That said, sound recording is also a massive rabbit hole. In fact, I'd say it's one of my biggest stumbling blocks. There are a million different mics, almost as many audio recorders. Then there's post-processing. And, well, you get the idea. What I find even more frustrating is that there also seems to be a lot of mysticism around audio too. In still photography, I could always turn to hard data on lens resolution or sensor performance. However, when it comes to sound, my experience has been that finding good information and advice is a lot harder. Before I start talking about the practical stuff, let's talk about some theory. If you're like me and you're coming to video from the world of photography, the physics of sound will be both familiar and a bit different. On the familiar side, like light, sound obeys the inverse square law. That is, if you cut the distance between the mic and the source in half, the sound the mic hears gets 4 times louder, not twice. Moreover, like light, sound will bounce around a room creating reverb, potentially even echo. This in turn can color your recording, just like light bouncing off of a color wall will color the images in your subject, or the subjects in your images. With that said, there are also some practical aspects that don't translate quite as obviously. To start with, your recording environment will set a floor on how quiet can be. This is the environment's noise floor, and it's created by all the little sounds that you can't stop and block out. These are things like fans, the fridge running, the AC compressor outside, or the leaf blower from the yard guy across the street. All of this combines into a low-level background noise that becomes the floor that sets the quietest part of your recording. The second thing the second thing that you'll have to deal with is that there's no such thing as a telephoto microphone, at least not in the same way that there's a telephoto lens in photography. You can get directional microphones, and these will narrow the field where they're most sensitive to sound, but it's not nearly as effective as a telephoto lens is in photography. Moreover, if there are any nearby surfaces for sound to reflect off, the mic will eventually pick it up. Instead of trying to narrow the mic's beam to focus on a subject, a better approach is to exploit the inverse square law and move the mic closer to the source. In fact, getting the mic closer will work in general, regardless of the environment, whether it's a big outdoor space or a confined room. The final thing I want to touch on theory-wise is decibels, or at least sound theory-wise. Decibels are abbreviated dB. Decibels can be simultaneously complicated and confusing and supremely simple. What makes them complicated is that there's a ton of different scales that are used. You'll see dBV, dBu, dBA, dBFS, and that's just the tip of the iceberg. On the flip side, what you really need to know about them is incredibly simple. All decibels describe the same size change. You can think of this a lot like the Celsius and Kelvin temperature scales. They have different zeros, but the unit, a degree Celsius or 1 Kelvin, both describe the same size step. The same applies to decibels in audio recording. All the different scales have different points of reference, but a 1 dB change in one scale translates to a 1 dB change in another. One final thing to note on decibels: 6 dB is equal to twice or half the volume, depending on which way you're going. Now, granted, there's a lot more nuance and depth in sound than what I've just covered, but we're working in baby steps here, and most of the other stuff isn't that important to getting started. Okay, with the theory of sound itself out of the way, let's move on to some recording theory. Again, there's a ton of details here if you want to get into them. I'm not, at least not in this video. Instead, I want to focus on the things that I found most important. When push comes to shove, at least when it comes to getting started with recording, there's really only one rule you always need to follow. You cannot let your levels clip. If you do that, you lose information and it ruins the recording. This is the audio equivalent of blowing your highlights in photography. Digital recorders use the dBFS scale, which stands for decibels full scale. 0 on that scale is the loudest level that can be recorded without clipping, and all usable levels are represented as negative numbers below that. With what I think is the most important stuff out of the way, let's talk briefly about what's not so important. For me, this is most of the stuff you'll find in the various guides online. Things like two-system audio, that is using a separate recorder instead of the one built into your camera, or bit depth, the differences in preamps and mics, and so on. It's important, but it's something that you need to grow into. It's not just the starting point, or it's not important at the starting point. That's about all the serious stuff I think you need to know to get started. More will obviously come later, but right now let's dive into some practical stuff. As I implied at the start, the number one thing you can do to boost your audio quality is get your mic closer to your source. In effect, you want to leverage the inverse square law to maximize signal and minimize noise. So we'll start with a brief demonstration. In this case, I'm using the camera's built-in mic. Mind you, most cameras have tiny, comparatively poor quality mics that you really don't want to use if you can avoid it. You'll notice right away that I sound distant and that there's a lot of obvious room noise. On the floor next to me is my computer, and while I built it with quiet fans, it's not perfectly silent. From the perspective of the microphone in my camera, my computer and my mouth are about the same distance away. The only thing that separates the hum of the fans and my voice is the actual loudness of the source. So if I'm speaking at, say, 60 dB and the fans are at 40 dB, then that 20 decibel difference is the only difference that you see in the recording levels. Moreover, you can hear a lot of other noise in the room. Again, everything in the room that makes noise is about the same distance from the mic, so the only thing that separates in volume is the actual volume it produces. Now I've switched to a lav mic clipped to my shirt. In this case, I'm using a Rode SmartLav Plus. In this instance, I have my lav plugged into my audio recorder, not my camera. However, I'm doing this to make the recording easier for me to make, not to skew sound quality, and in this case it really isn't. While the SmartLav is an omnidirectional mic, meaning it picks up sounds equally in all directions, the overall quality of this recording is noticeably better. Why? Because I'm exploiting the inverse square law. I've moved the mic from being 5 feet away to a foot away. That's reduced the distance by a factor of 5 and increased the relative loudness of my voice to the mic by 25 times. Of course, in moving the mic, I've also moved it closer to my computer, so the fans are now closer and relatively louder too. However, before the mic was about 5 feet from me and the computer the same distance as me from the mic's perspective. Now I'm 1 foot away from the mic and the computer's 3.5 feet away from, and the computer's 3.5 feet. So my voice has gotten 25 times louder to the mic, but the computer has only gotten maybe 3 times louder. This has improved the signal to noise ratio between me and my computer by something like 8 times over the recording at the camera. That said, for these videos I don't use a lav mic or my camera to record it. I'm using a dedicated audio recorder and an XLR shotgun mic boomed in overhead. That said, I'm still exploiting the inverse square law here too. While the mic isn't clipped to my shirt, it's just overhead out of frame, which puts it much closer to me than it would be to other sound sources in the room. As an aside, my primary reason for using the boom mic and external recorder have less to do with getting better sound and everything to do with learning more advanced processes. Eventually, if you want to be serious about shooting video, you're going to need to learn to work with two-system audio. While I don't think it's strictly necessary for this video or even many YouTube videos, I'm doing it because I need to figure out a workflow and get used to working with this kind of system. Honestly, it would be a lot simpler to just plug the mic into the camera, but that doesn't help me learn. For the final practical point, I'm going to talk about setting your recording levels. The industry standard best practice is to set your recorder's gain so that the normal level of your audio, of the dialogue that you're recording, or the sound in general, falls around minus 12 dB. Do note, I said around, not at. This isn't something that has to be done precisely, and honestly, it's something that I got far too invested in trying to get right at one point. What you want is headroom over the normal recording level for louder sounds so that they don't clip. In fact, the exact amount of headroom you'll need isn't fixed. If you're recording dialogue and you expect to have yelling as part of the scene, then you need to leave more headroom for that. On the other hand, for a video like this, where I'm speaking at an even level, I could reduce the headroom if I wanted to. To set your levels, you need to have your subject mic'd up and talking at the level that they will be during the recording. You then adjust the gain on your camera or recorder so that the level meters fall around the minus 12 dB mark. Almost all cameras or audio recorders will have an indicator where that is. It's easy enough as long as you don't get fixated on being exact. You just need to get in the ballpark. So finally, what about gear? Obviously, I'm not recommending going out and spending thousands of dollars in recorders and microphones. However, like most things, you're going to have to spend a little money. Though there's a lot of room for value here too. Additionally, I'll put links in the description and accompanying article to buy these items on Amazon. The lav mic I demonstrated earlier is a Rode Smart Lav Plus. They run about $61 on Amazon. One bit I like about the Smart Lav Plus is that it's designed to be plugged into a smartphone's 3.5mm headphone jack. Of course, those are dying, but Lightning or USB-C to 3.5mm adapters are readily available. This gives you some added flexibility. For example, I did an oral history interview with my grandmother with her mic'd up to my iPhone with the Smart Lav and the camera recording through another microphone as a scratch audio track. Of course, I'm using Canon DSLRs and they have a 30-minute recording limit. So at one point, the camera stopped recording in the middle of my grandmother talking. The video's missing, but my phone was still recording the audio, and I have the whole conversation. To hook a Smart Lav Plus up to a camera, you'll need a couple of extra bits. One is a Rode SC3 or comparable TRRS to TRS adapter. These run $8 to $15. The second is a 6 to 10 foot stereo extension cable, 3.5mm, so that you could get some distance from the camera. The mic's cord just isn't that long, and you'll need to be able to run it from you to the camera. Make sure you get one with a male plug on one end and a female socket on the other. This too again runs for as little as $5 to $10 on Amazon. Finally, if you're recording to a GoPro, you'll also need the audio adapter for that. Those I think are around $30. Altogether, for less than $100, you can get a pretty decent upgrade to your audio quality with this setup. That said, if you search Amazon, you'll find a lot less expensive lav mics. Moreover, many can be plugged directly into the camera without an adapter. I'm not telling you should avoid them. However, I'm not comfortable recommending products that I haven't personally used, so I can't tell you if they're any good or not either. I would expect most of them to be just fine for starting out though. I'm not going to get into my setup here per se at this time. However, I will say the mic I'm using is a Rode NTG2 and the recorder is a Tascam DR60D. That said, I'll be coming back to the whole two-system audio and the associated processing and my setup here in a future video, so stay tuned. In any event, I hope this helps some of you out there starting out to get a bit better of a handle on what you really need to get started with audio. There's a tremendous amount of depth to go, but this at least should get you recording clearer audio to go with your video. Please subscribe for updates on future episodes. If you click the notification bell, you'll also be notified when they're released. If you found this useful, or at least interesting, please smash the like button. If not, well, you know what to do. For more in-depth content on photography, travel, and technical stuff around cameras and photography, please visit my website at www.pointsandfocus.com. Finally, I can be found on Twitter at pointsandfocus. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.